Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the McCune Charitable Foundation. And viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, as wildfires burn bigger, hotter, and longer, is it time to rethink the job of firefighters?
I would say we're really kind of approaching a train wreck and a serious issue where firefighters are tired.
And lots of news on the policing front. The line runs it down. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Gene Grant. Last fall at this time, we were about to enter a brutal stretch of the pandemic. This year, numbers are spiking, but is there a ceiling? And will new vaccination mandates help? The Line Opinion Panel takes on those questions. The group also discusses new plans to boost both pay and training opportunities for educators. We'll also take a look at how the state is dealing with equity issues in its new cannabis legalization rules. We start with policing news that impacts both Albuquerque and the rest of the state. Here's the line. How many officers or deputies are enough? The governor wants to put 1,000 new officers on the streets around New Mexico. Albuquerque always seems to be measuring itself against 1,200, a goal it's more than 200 officers away from right now. And why are those jobs hard to fill? Is it the criminal element, the heavy hand of the feds, the culture of some departments? The Line Opinion Panel is here to talk through those questions and others. From the Albuquerque Journal political reporter Dan McKay returns, as does Crystal Ciarza. She's owner and CEO of Ciarza Social Digital. Former state senator and Line regular Dee Dee Feldman is back for another turn as well. I want to start with Albuquerque, guys, and with a key subset of that group of sworn officers, the ones on patrol. The city has 959 sworn officers now, not including supervisors. The Albuquerque Journal reported Sunday there are 404 patrol officers, less than half the force. Crystal, I think that gives a lot of people pause. Is that efficient? Does it feel efficient? Is the department doing a good job of explaining why that's the case? Because something's disconnected here. I'm interested in your take.
It's a very, very challenging, sore topic that I think many people in our community, including in the state of New Mexico, are very, very sad and the topic has run its course. Mm-hmm. It is a little alarming in terms of the 400 that you had just mentioned. I think one of the things that, and I know that we're going to get to the topic of the DOJ investigation. Mm-hmm. I remember when it first hit the headlines on a national scale that we were being reprimanded by the Department of Justice for the use of excessive force. And now here we are implementing some of the requests and changes. And even Chief Medina had discussed about how cumbersome a lot of these processes and procedures are, mm-hmm. And is accounting for a lot of the departures because of the fact that, he had said himself, and I'm abbreviating his kind of quotation about how the subject itself is cumbersome, and it's almost cumbersome is the best word to kind of describe how he was saying, mm-hmm. but it's absolutely necessary because of the fact that it's a Department of Justice investigation. Mm-hmm. And the microcosm of crime does include, the Department in New Mexico specifically does include, the resignations and terminations, saying that in 2021, as of August 31st, 101 retirements, resignations, and terminations, according to the Albuquerque Journal and the Albuquerque Police Department. Mm-hmm. 939 numbers by the officers of the fiscal year. It's an interesting take, especially as the elections are coming up, especially since crime is the number one subject that elections have. So it's one of those conversations that I know that this is jam-packed time, and I want to toss it back. Like it's something that's it seems so impossible to solve. Mm-hmm. So,
that can be an overriding feeling when things don't improve. Senator, the U.S. Attorney General that Crystal just announced this week that he's rethinking how monitors will and should oversee reform efforts at problem departments like Albuquerque's. Now, there's certainly room for improvement. Everybody knows that. But APD has had some notable misses in its reform. And however much the city is paying for a monitor, it's millions less than what it was paying in civil settlements, Senator, which is about $28 million before this all started. So kind of a long question there, but are we getting our money's worth out of this?
No, I don't think we are getting our money's worth. And the police are spending a lot of time investigating the use of force incidents. And that takes time away from patrol. That takes time away from the other kinds of preventive activities that the police need to do in order to get a handle on this. Just being visible in neighborhoods, reaching out to people who are victims of a cycle of violence, preventing retaliation for crimes that have already happened. But remember, these investigations and this federal order did not come out of nowhere.
Right.
It came out of James Boyd.
That's right.
And it came out of a lot of abuses of the use of force. So we can't just, and as you said, there were millions of dollars that the city spent in settling with the victims of police brutality, essentially. And so we can't let that be forgotten. The culture change is always difficult within a police department. I think that's what we're seeing now. And I think that's why there's a lot of retirements, a lot of people going away early.
That's right.
But we need to remember there is no ideal of 1,200 policemen to make it safe in Albuquerque.
Right.
It depends upon what the police do, how they spend their time. And how many are on the streets at any one given time. All 1,200 are not out there, so it's an interesting number. Got to Dan here real quick. I mentioned the state push for more officers and Albuquerque's push, of course. When the Journal, your colleague Elise Kaplan and your other colleague Colleen Heald took a look at staffing on Sunday, they pointed out that during Mayor Marty Chavez's big hiring push, the department took on a number of officers who then became big problems in the use of force cases, as a senator mentioned. Any sense of whether APD has solved that conundrum of keeping standards high while also finding officers that can make the grade?
Yeah, I think that's a difficult balance. Law enforcement agencies throughout New Mexico, including Albuquerque, have budgeted for a certain number of officers. And it makes, legislators or city councilors feel good to know, well, our budget includes money for X number of officers, but actually finding that many qualified, credentialed people to serve has been difficult. It's not just a matter of setting aside the money to do it. I know Albuquerque has struggled and debated pretty intensely what standards to have for police officers. Is it necessary that they have a college degree? Is it an associate's degree? Should they take a certain number of classes in college? But certainly, the answer that policymakers are dealing with here is not just to expand police forces, but to make sure that they're done in a sustainable way with the right number of people or with the right kind of people. And as you said, former Mayor Martin Chavez did face some criticism for, he succeeded in expanding the police department, but then, some of those officers were involved in police shootings and, other high profile incidents that ended up involving, the federal investigation.
Were you on the city hall beat or the county beat at that time, Dan? Were you remembering that correctly?
Yes.
I thought so, yeah. Where does this 1,200 number come from? How is this so, firm and cement now in our consciousness here in Albuquerque? It started with Mayor Marty. What was going on back then that made this 1,200 number so fixated for us?
Gangs.
Gang
Violence. That was going on. I think, Dan, maybe I'm wrong about that, but that was right when I was running for office, and that was a big problem. Juvenile gangs.
Yeah, Albuquerque has always had a high crime rate as long as I've been around, and it has always been, the top issue or one of the top issues at City Hall. The 1,200 number, there's debate about whether that is about where that number comes from. There have been staffing studies, but also, I think the amount you budget for, I don't necessarily put a lot of, I don't necessarily put a lot of stock in 1,200 as the number that they put in their budget. The really important number to me is the number of officers they actually have employed And Albuquerque has been seeing an increase in officers on the force for the last few years, but there's been a blip this year. So we had been on the increase, making steady progress toward a larger police force, and then it dipped this year. So the factors in that, are a little difficult to untangle, but it's clear that policymakers want more officers, whatever the number is, whether they get to 1,200 or not.
That's right.
Yeah.
Crystal,
Gene, to kind of
go ahead. We're
Go ahead.
under 2 minutes, so if you just be a little crisp, that'd be good. Go ahead, Crystal.
Oh, so, going back to the myth of 1,200 officers, so there, the Center of Public Safety Management, a study was conducted, a private LLC, a consulting firm for law enforcement, had said, the recommended officers per 1,000 population. And at the time when Mayor Chavez was elected, that's most likely where the number came from, because we were in between that awkward phrase of just shy of 1 million in the greater metro area. And so I think that's where that 1,200 number came from. I think one of the things we have to talk about, though, is that this culture shift and culture change. And I want to overemphasize that, because the Asian Business Collaborative, where I'm volunteer executive director, we've spoken to ABD several times, and the community policing and really targeting and showing support to various different groups has been such a culture shift that we're not taking into consideration as a part of the shortage as well. Because a lot of, for example, they have certain officers that are dealing with the Asian community, Black community, Hispanics, those that are more relatable from officers that could be more relatable to these communities that need assistance in some way, shape, or form. Taking away to a niche type of police force means more narrow scope of work, which means less people to do the larger, more important things in the world. We applaud, the Asian community applauds this effort, but at the same time, we understand that the culture has to change in order to make the city feel safer.
Good points there. You can bet we'll have more to discuss in future episodes. The Line returns in a bit to talk about another job that's been hard to fill: teachers.
The harms fell heavily on communities of color, low-income communities in New Mexico, tribal communities as well. And so we want to make sure that we create a new industry that allows communities that have been most harmed to be able to participate.
When our homes and our forests are threatened, we all appreciate the federal wildland firefighters who show up for us from all over the country. But they face bigger challenges every year, especially as climate change lengthens fire season and spawns bigger and more severe fires. But they also face struggles the rest of us never see: long assignments away from families and support networks, low pay, and mental health challenges. I sat down recently with current and former firefighters from across the West to talk about these problems and potential solutions. Marcus, Jonathan, Kelly, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So we've all been watching the big fires in California. We've all got smoky skies. I'm curious, can we start with you, Marcus? Can you talk a little bit about what life is like for a wildland firefighter?
Sure. I would say, first of all, it's a very sort of satisfying and fulfilling career, because a lot of people that do it like to be outside, like to help their neighbors. It's a public service that I think a lot of us feel satisfied at doing at the end of the day. But really the realities that we're starting to face now with potential climate change, I would say, increased fire seasons, more complex, longer duration, we're really starting to see, I would say, firefighters in a crisis mode. And this crisis mode is due to attrition. We have less firefighters on the ground at our federal levels because the pay and benefits are not adequate. Folks are asked to basically have these year-round fire seasons where we're committed to go help across the country. So I would say we're really kind of approaching a train wreck and a serious issue where firefighters are tired, they're kind of challenged mentally and physically, and it's really starting to enter a crisis mode, I would say.
So recently I saw an ad for wildland firefighters that said the jobs paid $15 an hour. And I understand that's a little bit of a bump, a Biden era bump, but one, is that enough to live on? And two, my understanding is these are considered seasonal jobs.
So that $15 an hour is roughly for our entry-level jobs, which, as you said, just recently bumped up. So before that, it was anywhere from $13 to $14 an hour, depending where you're at in the country. And these are all temporary 1039 positions is what they're considered, which have zero benefits except for medical care. And the medical care they have to pay for, it gets subsidized by the federal government during their employment, but as soon as the winter and they're laid off after 6 months, they have to pay the full price. So no retirement, no opportunity to contribute to any kind of 401k, basically zero benefits. So when the fire season's over, and this is the bulk of our federal firefighters are really these temporary employees. They're the ones that make up 3/4 of our hot shots. They're the ones that make up 3/4 of our heli-tac and smoke jumpers. As soon as the season's over, they basically have no ability to access mental health care benefits, to reach out for any kind of long-term physical issues they're having. Once they're laid off, and if their fire family's not there to support them, they have no benefits. So it's a tough position we put these temporary employees in, and many of them live in their cars because they can't afford the housing around where they work. So places, in the mountains, these mountain towns that have very expensive places to live that don't have crew quarters, basically these kids are living in their cars to go and fight wildland fire across the country, which is, it's hard to say and hard to think about, but I've been there. I did 11 years as a seasonal, and I look back and just kind of like unbelievable.
Yeah. Kelly Martin, you worked as a wildland firefighter for 35 years for the Forest Service and for the Bureau of Land Management. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this sort of long-term immersion in emergency situations, which is different from what we see sort of municipal firefighters or even police officers. Wildland firefighters are dealing with something very different.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Laura. And just for clarification, I spent half my career with the Forest Service and half with the National Park Service. And didn't work for the BLM, but worked with them quite a bit throughout my career. The immersion that we're seeing now is completely different than when I started 35 years ago. I might have gained maybe 400 hours of overtime during a summer season. And now we're seeing people regularly working 1,000, 1,500. And I think I've even heard that there's people out there that are almost working like 2,000 hours of overtime a year. So this constant immersion in an emergency mode is really having a tremendous impact on people's mental health and well-being, to say nothing of their physical well-being as well, when they're exposed to tremendous amounts of smoke, lots of risks and dangers with traveling on really rough, rugged backcountry roads. Vehicle accidents are always an issue, falling snags, burnovers. So that idea that individuals are now in this almost 24/7 year after year, we've really started seeing it accelerate in 2000 and now for 2001. It's without a doubt that that's how people are living their lives. Whereas in municipal fire departments, a fire station might get a call, they're 4 minutes en route to the emergency, and they have the emergency stabilized within about an hour and a half. That's simply just not the case for wildland firefighters. We are in it 24/7, week after week, month after month, and now we're talking year after year.
Earlier this year, a firefighter, Tim Hart, was killed due to injuries he sustained on a fire here in New Mexico. And after his death, I remember seeing a GoFundMe campaign to help his family dealing with the expenses due to his hospitalization. And I just remember thinking he was a federal employee working on a federal fire. What kinds of, how are firefighters taken care of when they sustain injuries or unfortunate accidents like this?
So that's kind of the reality of the situation. There's an organization that was started roughly 20 years ago called the Wildland Firefighter Foundation. And really that organization was the catalyst, and it's all charity donations from basically wildland firefighters supporting each other. So I would say recently, land management agencies have started to do a better job. I would give credit there, but I would say starting to. And we're seeing where they're not being able to cover, these GoFundMe and the Wildland Firefighter Foundation cover Tim's family to be able to travel down, be able to cover mortgage and bills when he's in a tough position in a hospital, any of our firefighters, be able to help the family make it through, because these families that we have basically depend on us being firefighters and us going and working and being away from home for 6 months out of the year. So as soon as that money's gone, there's no base, there's no help for the family. So long-term sort of medical care, I know the Wildland Firefighter Foundation has bought wheelchairs, has helped rehab. And the reality of why we need this is our OWCP program, the Office of Workmen's Comp, is broken. We have firefighters struggling that get injured on the job, struggling year after year to basically just survive these catastrophic incidents they have with mountains of paperwork, very little help from the federal government, and basically it's easier to just get outside donations to make it through.
Wow. Jonathan, you were a wildland firefighter for over a decade. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the private struggles that wildland firefighters are going through that, we in the public just have no idea these things are happening.
Yeah, thanks again for the opportunity to be here. Some of the private struggles that, I went through and I know my friends have gone through are just the isolation that you feel and the separation you have from your friends, from your families back home. The events that you miss out on, birthdays, weddings, graduations. I even know of, husbands and partners that were I was on fire with while their wife delivered, their children. And you miss out on these significant moments. And, when it comes time to lay down at night and try to get some sleep, you think about these things and it really begins to weigh on you. What am I missing out on? What am I doing here? I know when I started to have a family with my wife, it just became no longer sustainable for us or realistic for us to, potentially move our whole family across the country in order for me to chase a promotional opportunity, to effectively actually have more responsibility and be gone a lot more. And so, when that goes on, it becomes a real struggle. And sometimes we're able to successfully bury or suppress those memories. But, it comes out in the wintertime. People turn to alcohol or drugs. We've lost, partners and friends to suicide from it all. And so it's a real problem within the community that, frankly, isn't, I think, talked about enough and or addressed as best as it could be.
So I think the public, we very much have this perception of wildland firefighters. When our communities are at risk, people go out there with signs and want to bake cookies and drop off water and are so grateful when y'all arrive. But it really feels to me that there's this disconnect between what we, the public, think you all are going through and what is actually happening. And I'm curious, how are you supported by these federal agencies that we all pay taxes to and are, imagining that you're being supported? Is there support for things like depression or PTSD or anxiety or helping address this work-life balance that seems to be a problem?
I would say those are catchwords that different agency leadership have thrown out there, work-life balance. But the reality, Laura, is that these programs are anemic at best. And so I would be remiss to say that there's no help. We do have help networks, but I myself have tried to look into them. Like for me as a first responder to seek help on a particular kind of issue, like there's no counselors in my area that specialize in that are within that program. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people have faced with. It's very difficult to find mental health help on there, it's very difficult to go through the program, and really you only get like 5 to 7 visits and then it's on you. So a very weak support network, and like I was saying with the temporary employees, as soon as they're laid off, they basically have no access to this. So when you're in that transition time, like Johnny's talking about, into the season, you go away from your fire family, now you're turning to alcohol and drugs to hit those voids. You're very angry with the world, I would say. It's really kind of when I see these war movies of people coming back from Vietnam or war and trying to like reintegrate into society, that's really what people go through on a yearly cyclical basis of being totally immersed in a war type setting away from all your support network, and then you come back to try to integrate. And so I would say it's very poor, and I think it's a known issue, and folks are working on it, but at a very slow rate to really make a significant change, I would say. We need more money, we need better programs, we need more support.
So speaking of change, I'd like to talk a little bit about climate change. Let's start with you, Kelly. Fires 35 years ago compared with the fires we're seeing now. How has climate change affected the fire season and the wildland firefighters who have to deal with fire season?
Think about the environment that we're working in now and how different that was when I first started. So climate change is certainly a contributing factor, especially when we look at, significantly higher temperatures, longer fire seasons. So we can actually measure that. So we know that that's actually occurring. The other thing that's occurring is this unnatural fuel buildup. If you can imagine, from one moment, the Western United States was very void of people about 150 years ago. So quote unquote, the good fire or the friendly fire was allowed to play its natural role on the landscape for millennia. And here we come and we occupy the West at tremendous numbers. California used to have 1.5 million people in 1900, and now they're up to 40 million. So we're seeing this play out where not only is climate change adding to these large mega fires, but we're also seeing the unnatural fuel buildup because of the suppression of wildfires on the landscape, which is increasing the fuel loading in the vegetation and also increasing the insect disease and drought susceptibility to trees that are on the landscape and adding to the population explosion. So it's really putting our firefighters in a really untenable situation, especially these last 24 months. This is really should portend to all of us what the years are going to look like in the years to come. And we cannot keep operating under the same antiquated system that we developed 50 years ago.
Well, thank you, all three of you, so much for this conversation. I have learned so much, and I really appreciate your time and your energy on this topic.
Thank you so much for having us, Laura. I think this is an issue. It's important to New Mexico. It's important to the United States, and I appreciate your time and interest.
New Mexico has tried all sorts of remedies to its perennially low performance by students and schools. It's a problem the state isn't done trying to solve, and two parts of the big push in the past couple of decades are more early childhood education, as you know, and more educational professionals in the classroom to help students. The idea behind a pair of recent announcements is to make educational jobs more attractive. Let's start with early childhood education. The state wants to put qualified early childhood educators on the same pay scale as teachers. The money the state is putting forward to the program might be enough for 200 earners. And Senator Feldman, does this seem like a fully formed policy, more of a trial effort, or kind of looking down at the future at the horizon and a pretty good idea? Where do you fall on this?
Well, I don't know whether it would have happened but for the federal funds.
Right.
But it's a good pilot program, and we've known for many years that the salaries for early childhood folks and every academic study shows that these are the formative years. This is going to determine whether kids know how to read by third grade. Every study shows that, and yet we pay our early childhood workers $10 an hour, $11 an hour,
right.
No benefits, part-time work. It's been a disgrace. It's really been a disgrace, and the legislature has been trying to focus on this for the past decade.
That's right.
Really. And this year we're going to get an opportunity to vote on whether to spend more money from the permanent fund for that purpose. But you know, it's a tough road to hoe. People don't seem to want to put in this money and this time into supporting early childhood education. And you know, there's
let me interrupt for a quick second, Senator, before I get to Crystal here with another question. Are we past the partisanship of early childhood education right now? It's both Democrats and Republicans are on board with this.
Yes,
seemingly.
But you see, there's the question of whether the early childhood education should be done by the private sector or whether it should be an adjunct of the public schools.
Gotcha.
And there you get a little bit of partisan divide in there.
Gotcha. Crystal, have we seen results from what's been invested in early childhood education since the mid-2000s? Anything tangible there we can all point at and say, this is the way we got to go, guys?
So if you were to use like my son as a perfect example, has there been advances as he, you know, he was born in 2008 and where he is now, the early childhood education challenges are still the same. And it has been a very difficult piece for all of us to tackle. I remember joining Kiwanis, which Kiwanis Clubs of Albuquerque, early childhood education is such a proponent part, but it comes back to affordability. It comes back to the quality of the curriculum, the quality of teachers, et cetera, and to kind of fall back onto the conversation about the minimum wage increase. Even though I'm a small business owner and I know how difficult minimum wage increases can be, anything that's state government related can be very difficult to increase the minimum wage because then, yes, I understand that Olay, for example, in the story from the New Mexico Political Report, they're saying that Olay is pushing for $400 billion for childcare programs in a federal infrastructure bill that will help childcare workers earn at least $15 an hour. There are some mental health therapists that don't even receive $15 an hour. Right. And so the conversation about federally funded is incredibly difficult. And then you have to talk about if it even goes back to privatization for early childhood education, the business costs will start to go up. Then it gets passed on to the individual parent or the families themselves, and they can't even afford it to begin with. We've got to find a better way for public-private partnerships in order to increase early childhood education. And most importantly, go back to, and this goes back to what Representative Kay Wonkua, the new representative, goes back to. If you're trying to solve a policy issue when it comes to education, it's got to be related back to the community. What can we do for our communities to help them be a part of the culture change of early childhood education while going back to the teachers? The teachers need to be a part of that conversation, which they're often excluded from, period.
Good point there. The other investment, Dan McKay, is in teaching assistants. Notoriously hard jobs to fill. They pay very little, so the plan is to take $37 million to offer pay for 500 assistants this year, and then give them up to $4,000 a year to start a degree program for themselves. And it's called the New Mexico Teacher Fellows Program, to be official about it. Does this make sense to you in your gut?
Well, I think it's a strategy that the state is going to try. I think policymakers have tried something similar with police officers, you know, seizing on service aides to try to use that as a pipeline to get into law enforcement careers. I think naturally, you know, it does make some sense that you'd start with someone, a teaching assistant who is, or an education assistant who is already interested in education, already working with students, already has some idea of classroom dynamics. I think it certainly makes sense that those are people you might target to increase, you know, to address our teacher shortages. So we'll see. I mean, you know, this is kind of a recurring theme. You know, New Mexico is struggling with shortages in certain professions, you know, doctors, educators, police officers. And this is a tool to see if we can address the teacher shortage.
Senator, you know, one of the important things to note here is the state hopes that districts who get these fellows we're talking about as part of the program will not just take a free teacher's assistant, but use some of their own money that the state's going to give them to boost pay. Seems to me that's almost a must-do for this thing to work, as Dan just related. I mean, we have a history of if something's going to get better, you have to put better pay on the table. Are we at that point where we all just fundamentally understand that now?
and you have to have community involvement, as Crystal said. I really, I agree with that. And I think also, if you go to any school, teaching assistants are already an important part of that school community. And they're doing a lot. We heard from them every year, asking for more money. But if you go to any school, you will encounter and see teachers' assistants and see what they're doing with the kids. And it's very important. Sometimes they're the ones that the kids relate to the most.
And there's a consistency there with the assistants, knowing a few teachers. When you don't have that consistency, it's a problem. Crystal, New Mexico didn't lose as many teachers to retirement last year as was expected from the pandemic, but the state says districts were still short some 600 teachers last year. Seems clear teaching has lost its attraction as a solid job with good security, maybe some enviable time off, all those things that used to be, are these the kind of programs that make a difference, or is this something fundamentally undesirable about a career in the classroom anymore?
Well, if you're asking me about incentives in the workplace to keep your employees there, that's a hard battle you're going to fight with me. But I think one of the things that teachers also had a problem with is safety and security in the classrooms because of COVID. I mean, we don't even have to tackle that conversation because I think that's the next segment, right? And so teachers, of course, if you ask a teacher, like, what are some of the things that they have to deal with on a daily basis? It might be the external factors of what actually happens in the classroom that keeps them motivated to stay or encourages them to get out of the classroom. So, for example, you're talking about how do we improve early childhood education?
But you know what? Everyone has a line financially. You can put up with a lot when you're getting paid.
Sure. Most definitely. But remember, pay doesn't matter if the child still doesn't go to the classroom.
Right.
A lot of the districts are losing money because of the fact that kids are just simply not returning to school, and truancy rates and graduation rates are suffering. A lot of those problematic issues, I've always said this about early childhood education, is that a lot of the issues that happen in the classroom actually happen at home. And so if we're going to tackle the conversation of teacher shortages, early childhood education, et cetera, we have to tackle the challenges that happen at home and encourage a positive environment in terms of teaching kids in schools.
Good point there to finish. Have to leave it there, but our opinion panel has one more turn this week. We'll be back in a few minutes to talk about the latest COVID news.
Knock on wood, we haven't had an outbreak here in our office at CRZ, but it's still very nerve-wracking to have, and it also becomes a matter of how do we make sure that, on one hand, we're asking very politely and some individuals are not getting vaccinated. On the other hand, we've got some of our employees that feel uncomfortable if our other individuals, and if we can't talk about it as an organization.
Recreational cannabis is now legal in New Mexico, but there's still a lot that needs to be figured out. That's where the Cannabis Regulatory Advisory Panel comes in. The group of physicians, community members, and industry experts advises the Cannabis Control Board, and it's where a lot of the action is right now. Our Growing Forward podcast team recently talked with 3 key members of the panel. You can catch the full Growing Forward episode, including a good look at potential issues with the law on sovereign indigenous nations here in New Mexico, wherever you get your podcasts. But we wanted to bring you part of that conversation on this week's show.
And Emily, I wanted to ask you, a part of the Cannabis Regulation Act that became law earlier this year also requires an equity plan to ensure adequate representation in the upcoming cannabis industry. You were also pretty involved in the legislative process. Can you talk about why representation is important and the initial steps the board is taking towards that goal?
Yeah, we're really excited that there's language in the statute that addresses equity. And what we mean by social and economic equity is that we know that the war on drugs, prohibition, the harms fell heavily on communities of color, low-income communities in New Mexico, tribal communities as well. And so we want to make sure that we create a new industry that allows communities that have been most harmed to be able to participate. And so part of the statute was we are charged as an advisory board to provide recommendations back to CCD on policies and procedures to promote and ensure that there's participation in the new industry by New Mexico communities. I think we're the only state in the nation that actually named some specific communities, tribal communities, Acequia communities, land-grant Merced communities, and other historic communities. And so we really stand out in, I think, pushing the bar on equity and making sure that our system is as equitable as possible. Now, the statute does include some other equity provisions. So for example, the micro businesses. However, we know that communities that have been most harmed, people who are formerly incarcerated, people who have a felony on their record have a harder time getting into the market. There's so many barriers: access to capital, legal barriers, distrust in government. And so we're hoping that the plan we come up with will actually define a social equity applicant, and we'll be making recommendations on how to support those equity applicants, from technical assistance programs to recommending that the legislature appropriate dollars on things like revolving loan funds for equity applicants. And so it's the most, in my opinion, the most critical thing that this advisory board will be doing is really making sure that our communities are represented in this new industry.
Are you guys looking to the other programs that have for models for that, like SBA and like disadvantaged business, those kinds of things?
Absolutely. I think those will become models. And we're looking at other states, because not only have states done this, but also local government. And I'll just shout out that the city of Albuquerque has set up an equity committee to address cannabis equity at a local level. And that committee is made up of community members that have been mostly impacted by prohibition.
I just wanted to mention that one of the things that I've done in my life is that I have been a small scale commercial farmer as well. And there's certainly a lot of enthusiasm in the small farmer community in northern New Mexico, and I imagine throughout the state, in being able to participate in this new market, but that they feel, for all of the reasons that Emily mentioned, potentially that they may be overwhelmed by the larger producers and manufacturers. So I think the emphasis on equity is good and hopefully will result in a lot of people being able to benefit rather than just a few.
Emily, to follow up on the equity portion, the Cannabis Control Division did add some specificity on the equity issue through rules and regulations. But I've also sort of heard this thing mostly online, or just people talking to me, that it seems to me that there's this misunderstanding that instead of encouraging certain groups to apply, that there's some sort of quota. Is your reading of that the same, that it's not that they have to approve so many people from that group, but it's an encouragement to get those groups to apply? Do I have that right?
Yeah, and so what's different from New Mexico, just looking at other states' equity programs, is other states had a cap on licensing, right? So they, you look at, let's say, New York's statute, they set a limit, a threshold of how many licenses have to go to equity applicants. So for example, 50%. So they've set that in statute. New Mexico is different in that we have no cap on licenses. And in fact, that might benefit us from an equity perspective in the long run. Anyone can apply. So what the rules and regs that you referenced, Andy, there's just a goal that's set there. It's saying of the applications that CCD gets, the goal is that at least 50% are equity applicants. Now, there are many other steps to support those equity applicants. So There will be programs and procedures set up to support and how we define an equity applicant. So our advisory board is charged with making recommendations on what criteria will be for equity applicants. So it's not a quota. It's really a goal that's set to say, we hope that at least 50% are equity applicants.
Maybe we all saw this coming, but it's still not great news to hear the governor's indoor mask mandate has, quote, at least another month to go. That as the Delta variant continues its march through New Mexico and the nation. Over the past few days, we've seen case counts level off a little, but they're still high, as are hospitalizations. Now, one new thing is the Biden administration's request to have OSHA force businesses with more than 100 employees to require vaccinations, as you might have heard. And Dan McKay, does it feel to you as though anything has changed with respect to who is going to be abiding by these mandates, masks or vaccine? Is the same people abiding, the same people not abiding? Have we brought this closer together? How's this going to work?
It does. There is some evidence that vaccination rates have picked up a little bit. At least they did in August.
Due to the mandates.
Yes. So I think, and incentives. There was $100 incentive. So I think that there are people out there who are genuinely reluctant to get vaccinated, but still open-minded. Mm-hmm. And those are the people who are going to come up with employment. Who are going to comply when their job is on the line. Mm-hmm. So I do think that the opposition is not entirely hardened, although there certainly is sort of a vocal element. But there are people who are still getting vaccinated, for the first time this far into the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Senator, interesting stats here. Unvaccinated people are 40 times more likely to die of COVID. 9 out of 10 COVID hospitalizations are unvaccinated people. A lot of folks know this, but a lot don't. And a recent study shows an almost $8 billion cost to treat unvaccinated COVID infections. That's a phenomenal number when you really think about it, $6 billion, not to mention the loss to the economy. I guess I say again, is there, for folks that don't want to abide, should there be a societal cost to them? Should society make it a little more difficult on them to go anywhere, to do anything? Is that the next step here?
Well, it's hard to see what the next step is. This seems pretty drastic as it is. But I do think, yes, that we'll see if this works. I think, a $14,000 fine for a business who does not require vaccinations to protect its own employees,
right,
or testing it's pretty hefty. But there needs to be. This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated, mm-hmm. and we are all paying the price for them. In fact, I read a story just recently about a nurse who worked in a ICU who is quitting because she has worked day in and day out with people who have had COVID at great physical and mental cost to her. And now she's working with people who had the choice of whether to get vaccinated or not, and they chose not to. Mm-hmm. And now she is saddled with taking care of them, with putting them on a ventilator, with conveying their last wishes to their families. Mm. And, it's too much to expect of people. It's too much to expect. And I think that the president will be on very firm constitutional grounds with requiring vaccinations. And I think that will make a difference. It's going to take a while, but people are getting vaccinated because I don't think people are ready to go back to being shut down. And that is that if we don't get a higher vaccination level, that may be the only alternative. And no one wants that. That damages the economy tremendously.
There you go. A good point there, that last point. Hey, Crystal, the White House is selling this mandate as a cover for businesses who want their employees to get vaccinated but are worried about requiring it themselves. In other words, they can now blame the government. I mean, you own a business. What are you asking or requiring? And if you had over 100 employees, I got to ask you, would this feel better to you?
Well, I wish I had over 100 employees, but it's very awkward for a small business owner or a large business owner, because technically, under 100 is still a small business in the U.S. In the Small Business Administration's eyes. It's so awkward to have these conversations, and in terms of leadership, because some of us business owners actually want to make sure that an individual feels comfortable in the workplace, but because of external circumstances that are outside of the workplace, it makes it uncomfortable to have conversations about vaccines. Knock on wood, we haven't had an outbreak here in our office at Ciarza, but it's still very nerve-wracking to have, and it also becomes a matter of how do we make sure that, on one hand, we're asking very politely and some individuals are not getting vaccinated. On the other hand, we've got some of our employees that feel uncomfortable if our other individuals, and if we can't talk about it as an organization. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things I do kind of want to divert away from the conversation about small businesses and look at like what at the whole picture of our country. I feel very optimistic, not only from the state of New Mexico, but here in the United States, that we're actually finally hitting a plateau. And I understand that small business owners and employers in general have to make sure that the doors are still open, because the amount of sick leave and the amount of outages that we've had because of people coming down with COVID. I feel very optimistic that we're actually hitting the plateau that we're starting to see here in New Mexico, that employers are just anxious to go back to what life was like 2 years ago. And 2 years ago, when nothing was going on in terms of COVID, right. and all of our employment and our staffing levels were pretty okay. But to answer your question,
let me jump in for Dan here for a quick sec. I appreciate that. I want to take a brief moment, Dan, to chat about ivermectin. Are we over this? If studies show ivermectin is effective, what's the hit to trust of the medical community? Is that fair? After all, this is how science works, right? I mean, there's almost like a mini trial going on that people are taking upon themselves to do. How should we consider this ivermectin thing?
Well, I think it's just too early to say whether ivermectin is effective for COVID-19, according to the FDA and the CDC. There are studies underway. It may prove to be an effective treatment, but that's not clear yet. We've had our first suspected ivermectin overdose death in New Mexico, but that is not connected to, a prescription from a doctor. This is someone who apparently got the medicine from a veterinary supply store, and that is a whole other thing, in terms of the volume or self-administering something like that. So there are kind of two separate issues. There's sort of this black market type of vet supply drug, and then there's also people who get it through their physician. But the state of New Mexico, the top physicians for the health department are advising people, do not try to take ivermectin on your own. Let the studies play out, and we'll find out if it's an effective treatment. There are other effective treatments that are already available. Mm-hmm.
Good point there. Senator, let's talk schools. How do we feel it's going to work? With in-person learning, it's clearly important and better for most kids to learn that way. We all know that. But August saw a huge increase in positive cases for kids who were on campus at some point. Now that's starting to wane, certainly, but does anyone see any way around this other than masks and vaccines, Senator? I can't imagine there's any other solutions out there.
I agree with you. I think that we have to maintain masks, and of course that's what the state order said, indoor masking for the next month. Mm-hmm. And particularly important in younger children for whom there is no vaccine yet. And I wish I would hear more talk about vaccines for those younger children. Mm-hmm. You don't hear that much about it.
I was just about to ask. Let me spin that to Crystal. We won't know until the end of the month, actually, if the CDC is going to recommend vaccine boosters at 6, 8, or 10 months. Any sense we'll get a similar, rate of people to get with the shot? We're not talking about kids here, as Dee Dee just was, but the booster thing, does that have a chance in this society?
So the booster thing, I think, does have a chance into the society, into our current society now, especially for those that are immunocompromised, like Councilor Lon Sena, publicly came out and said, me as a cancer survivor, I'm currently actively going through chemotherapy. It was the best thing. As much as I wanted to make sure somebody else had the vaccine, I need to get a booster myself. So yes, I think that booster shots should absolutely be a part of the conversation. Talking about children, if there was any big critique that I had, it is, why are we not talking about children? Agreeing with Senator Dee Dee Feldman, we absolutely need to start thinking about vaccinating our children, because of the fact that, looking at, polio and how that was a children's type of illness. We look at mumps, rubella, measles, et cetera. We have vaccines for that. Why not add that? Why not add COVID into the conversation, so that way over time our communities become immune to COVID over the next generations.
Good point.
And I think too, yeah.
Go ahead. Last word. Go ahead. Real quick.
And the last thing too, it's we just need, the world in general just needs to get on board with vaccines. I look at things that are happening in China and losing trust in vaccinations and the lack of education in China, in the Philippines, in Asia, et cetera. It is really disheartening to see that the rest of the world doesn't understand the importance of vaccines and helping us get back to where we need to be as a global economy and as a community of various different countries. So
that'll do it for this week. Thanks to our panelists. I'm back in a moment with some final thoughts. Now and again, I get the feeling the never-ending use of that word crime may be actually contributing to the problem. We are endlessly fighting crime here. The problem with fighting anything is once the fight starts, someone's going to win and someone's going to lose. And right now, one could reasonably argue from the numbers we are currently not winning. Namely, parents are not winning. Like many of you, I've gone through the gauntlet of sending our kids off to work to their first jobs in this stick-em-up environment. I was genuinely triggered by the 2 early morning robberies this week that ended with employees allegedly shooting the robbers. Getting up at 4:30 in the morning for the early shift shouldn't have to include bringing a firearm, but there it is. Living like this is unfair. It just is. And not just for parents. If there was a time for a big idea, it certainly must be now. Thanks again for joining us and for staying informed and engaged. We'll see you again next week in Focus.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the McCune Charitable Foundation and viewers like you.